Welcome to the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and please join me as I time travel back and revisit almost every live show I've ever seen from 1975 to the present. Hey there, your host, Various Artists here. Welcome you back for another MyLifeInConcert.com podcast, the podcast series where I'm revisiting almost every live show I've ever seen from 1975 to the present. However, this podcast, episode 9b, entitled Waiting in Vain, is about 22 performances I missed. Since this is the summer of 2020 and the summer of COVID, we're all missing shows this year. So I thought it would be good to do my podcast based on my blog entry number 20, which I had put in to commemorate all the shows and artists that I missed. Unlike my usual episodes where I recount a gig that I did see from the past, today I'm looking at shows that I was supposed to see. Either I had a ticket or someone had a ticket for me, or there was real intent to go, but for some reason or another, I did not make it to the show. And that is part of going to shows. Part of going to shows is not going to shows. So in 2012 on the blog, MyLifeInConcert.com, I came up with this list of 20 performances that I missed, and I've updated it with the two performances I would have seen this past April, but were canceled because of the COVID pandemic. In episode 9A, I recounted missing shows from The Clash, XTC, Bob Marley, Joan Armatrading, Simple Minds, Nick Cave, Stefan Grappelli, and Sonic Youth. That was a fun one that ended with the show being oversold and riot police surrounding the concert hall. In this episode, 9B, I'll be looking at shows 9 to 22 on the list. Also a reminder that we have our YouTube channel, are on Facebook and Instagram, and now have My Life in Concert playlists on Spotify under my pen name, Various Artists, including one for this episode. And of course, the podcast can be heard on the MyLifeInConcert.com website, our Buzzsprout home, Spotify, and many other fine podcasting sites. And I'd encourage you to add your own missed concert memories at the blog, YouTube channel, or the Facebook page. Okay. Now on to number 9. The Grateful Dead, Pine Knob Theater, Michigan, USA, June 20th, 1991. And as for why I didn't go, it's that popular reason that's happening at this time. I didn't have enough money to get to the gig. It's the broke student syndrome. And once again, it was Keith Garcia Westerberg offering me a ticket, and I couldn't get to the show. I actually really remember that day. It's just like this one, very, very hot. Just kind of sitting around, didn't have anything to do, and get invited to go to this gig where there's a ticket waiting for me. What had happened was he went to the parking lot party to hang out, as a lot of the Deadheads did, and some of them never made it into the show. And if they were having too much fun in the parking lot, they would miracle someone by giving them the tickets, and he was miracled. He had a miracle. He had 2 tickets. So he called me up and said, I'm at Pine Knob, which is just like 2.5 hours away. All you need to do is get here. And again, it was a day exactly like I was broke, like absolutely stone broke. When you're a student and by this point in time, your money's really running out. And I had a summer job and I wasn't even getting the hours that year that I normally would. So it was a particularly broke summer. So it was very frustrating. It was also kind of funny too that Keith Garcia Westerberg, and you'll know where the Garcia comes in now, was phoning me is because he had turned into this big-time Deadhead, and I was the one responsible for starting that happening. He'd been in my car a couple of years earlier, and in the mid to late 80s, especially I went back to some of the artists I really hadn't been listening to from that period. And I was listening to the Grateful Dead, and I think their output's really uneven, but the good stuff's great, especially, American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, but there's others I like as well. And I had a couple of cassettes in the car. One had Working Man's Dead and American Beauty. And you know how back in the day we all would keep our, sort of a series of cassettes in the car, a selection of cassettes to choose from. That was there, and also I had a commercial copy of Skeletons from the Closet, the best of the Grateful Dead. And I was giving him a ride somewhere, and he was looking at my cassettes and going, do you know, I don't really know anything about the Grateful Dead at all. I said, well, as I just sit here, their output's pretty uneven, but when they're on, they're really on. And it's like, can I borrow these? And I'm like, okay, sure. And so a couple of hours later, I get a call and he's flipping out. Oh, God, I love them. I love them. I want to borrow everything you have of theirs. And, which wasn't a ton. It was just a few albums, but he came over and borrowed everything. I remember he particularly got into Europe 72, but that was kind of it. And then he was, within a short period of time on the road following them around and blah, blah, blah. But this was a shame. I'd love to have seen them live. And again, he had the ticket. I just couldn't get down. I could barely afford, like milk that week. It was one of those sorts of things. And also, too, my thinking was also, hey, this is the Grateful Dead. I mean, I'm going to have tons of opportunities to see them. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work out that way when Jerry Garcia unexpectedly died in 1995. Well, at least those of us who weren't following closely, it was unexpected. And I remember that day because I was in a grad program I really hated. But there was somebody who was in one of my classes who was a bit of a deadhead, and she was pretty cool. And I went home for lunch because I was close from school, and that's when it was breaking on cable news that he had died. And I went back, and we had to go to this seminar that afternoon. It was in this workshop. And I said, did you hear Jerry Garcia died? And we were talking about this. And when we were in this class, this really weird sound kept coming into the class. It was like this high-pitched sort of squeal, and even the teacher didn't know where it was coming from. And me and this woman were looking at each other going, it's Jerry. Anyway. Oh, well. Very, very frustrating. I would love to have seen them live because I think that would have been the way to experience them, but there you go. And now on to number 10, Blossom Dairy at the top of the Senator, Toronto, Ontario, Canada in the fall of 1994. And why couldn't I go? Wait for it. You got it. I couldn't afford it. She was coming in. I had really discovered Blossom at the start of the decade, and she has become one of my favorite singers of all time. She's a jazz singer, but it's kind of more cafe society. And she had this very unique, almost girlish voice. And she really traded on sharp, witty material and amazingly restrained and beautiful piano playing. And in the years before, I had really fallen in love with Blossom, and she was being rediscovered, and I discovered her in that phase of rediscovery. And she was coming to Top of the Senator, the old jazz club in Toronto. And again, MZ let me know she was coming and that she was going to go. But again, I had no money for a ticket. MZ was broke, and I just couldn't afford. I couldn't afford the ticket. I couldn't afford to get down. I think it had also been one of these things that a lot of times my student loan would arrive late. So any kind of spare money might have been there, but I just had none. I kept hoping I would be able to get the funds. I think I was borrowed up to everyone. It didn't happen. I couldn't go to the gig. MZ went and said it was very good. And I thought, okay, well, next time I'll see her. And again, unfortunately, Blossom Dearie died a few years later. So that was my one opportunity to see her. Missed. Unfortunately, you can't do them all. So damn, another one down. Now on to 11. Beck, Elastica and Moby, Lollapalooza 95, Molson Park, Barrie, Ontario, Canada, Sunday, July 23rd, 1995. Now, I was at that Lollapalooza, and there will be a report on that one later, a podcast and an entry on that. So it's not that we weren't at the festival, but we missed these three acts, all three of which I would have loved to have seen. Now, as for the reasons we didn't see the gig, first, there's Beck and Elastica. They were on the bill. They were due to play. The reason is we just got there late. Again, I was going with MZ, and 1995, that's going to be an interesting summer when I get there, as it was a real crap summer. I've had ups and downs in my life, and that was a down one. And it was a crappy summer punctuated by a series of amazing gigs from the spring to the fall, which really made life a whole lot better. And this is one of them. It was an amazing Lollapalooza. Sonic Youth were incredible. Pavement were amazing. Hole were very entertaining. Courtney was certainly on a rant in that one. But it was we were both kind of down. We didn't know if we really felt like going. We'd been to the last few. We had the tickets. But if you've gone to these things, there's a lot of effort involved. First, you have to go there. You're parking. You have to go from the parking lot to, like the stage area, which is usually hugely far apart. We thought, do we want to drive all the way up there? It's 3 hours. I have to go through Toronto to pick her up. And then go up there, do the walk, be in the sun, and finally we eventually said, we've got the tickets, let's go. And I'm so glad we did, because that was the last Lollapalooza I went to. And unfortunately, because we were slothful, we did not get there until later in the stage. Actually, we got there just as Pavement were starting, and they were the band I most wanted to see, so I was thrilled about that. And then Sonic Youth went on to give, I think, one of the best shows I saw them play. However, we weren't there in time for Beck and Elastica, and I had particularly been getting more and more into Beck. Now, that's coming up later. I did see him at the Sony Center in 2014. That's coming up way down the line. Elastica I never got to see. And then there was Moby, and that's a different scenario, because I had started listening to more electronic and dance music. That was re-entering my listening kind of in the early and middle part of the decade. And we were walking by the second stage, and I looked over, and I thought it was Moby's logo, and I saw this guy on the stage, and I'm like, wait a minute, is that Moby? I wasn't sure who was playing the second stage that day. Again, I was a little more checked out than I had in the other Lollapaloozas. And MZ was like, no, it's not Moby. It's not Moby. And I said, I think it is. No, it's not Moby. Yeah, it was Moby. So anyway, I wish I had sort of gone closer and looked. It was Moby. Unfortunately, I missed him for that reason. But I would love to have seen him and have not had a chance since. But maybe one day. Okay, number 12. Lollapalooza 2004 with the Flaming Lips, Sonic Youth, Morrissey, PJ Harvey, Wilco, TV on the Radio, Polyphonic Spree, and more at Ontario Place's Molson Amphitheatre, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, July 2004. It was the first attempt to revive Lollapalooza, and they did it again as a touring festival. It was going to be a 2-day touring festival, and the tour was canceled. Now, on one hand, it's kind of incredible that this got canceled, because, I was talking about the lineup for Heatwave. This lineup would, rival that. Although, mind you, this was over 2 days. Just an incredible lineup of groups, but they didn't get the ticket sales. The lineup, the talent was there. I think it's everything else with the tour that was a problem. Now, whenever Lollapalooza came up here through Canada, they always, here in the Toronto area, it was always at a big open air site. Now, I don't know about this, but I have read that in a lot of the American gigs, they took place in seated amphitheaters. I don't know if that's true. That's insane. That's pretty much counterproductive to a festival in a lot of ways. But that's what I heard. And up here, for this next one, it was all amphitheaters. I don't want to spend 2 days sitting in a seat. One seat. I want, if it's going to be a festival, I want it to be a proper festival. I had the tickets. I was going with MZ again, and a friend of mine from the States was coming up. But we were surprised. I was surprised, but not surprised, because the thing was, again, it was in the middle of the week. It was a 2-day thing. It was going for a bit of an older crowd who, have day jobs and that. It's hard to take 2 days off of work in the middle of the week. And anyway, it was a great idea in terms of the acts. It wasn't executed well, and unfortunately they had to cancel it. And of course, then it's now a permanent event in Chicago. But this was the first attempt, didn't happen. A real shame, because that is one hell of a lineup. Although pretty much everyone I have seen at one point in time. I think everyone I've seen at one point in time. The Flaming Lips in 2010 and 2011, both of those reviews are up on my blog. I saw Sonic Youth 7 times. I saw the Smiths twice. I've seen PJ Harvey twice. I've seen Wilco 4 times. A few of the reviews are up there. And I've also seen TV on the Radio. And Polyphonic Spree, I just discussed in episode 5, podcast episode 5, concert number 104, where they opened for David Bowie in Ottawa the last time I saw Bowie in 2003. So that's up to, 2004. So that's up to listen to. And so on to Unlucky 13 and U2 with the Arcade Fire, Scotiabank Place, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, November 25th, 2005. And this is simply, we could not get tickets. There was a reason they were coming. I think it was something that Bono had worked out with then Prime Minister Paul Martin, who was PM for about 5 seconds. And anyway, U2 came to Ottawa, and by all accounts, ticket demand, it was 5 times what was available. And and also the Arcade Fire were opening, who were super hot at the time. And even though they were from Montreal 2 hours away, they surprisingly hadn't really played much at all in Ottawa. I don't know if they ever had. And if it had been very, very early on. So this was to say it was hotly anticipated is an understatement in Ottawa. And the morning the tickets went on sale, and this is even before the days where bots got excessive where they are now, where it's hard to get any good tickets. But we were both set up. We had computer browsers open on 2 different computers, plus the phone lines. And the moment it started, we just kept refreshing all the browsers, constantly calling through. And eventually we gave up after a couple of hours. And again, as I heard, it pretty much sold out in something like a half an hour. And if that. And they could have played probably 100,000 people would have showed up from the region. So unfortunately, didn't get the tickets. And also, unfortunately, everyone I know who went said it was an amazing show. And that's the weird thing with U2. I've been following them. Well, not so much anymore, because this century, I think their albums have been terrible. But everything they did in the previous century, I thought was great. And I was following them since I heard Boy in the fall of 1980. And for whatever reason, I've never seen them. And I've always wanted to. So I'm hoping to rectify that. As with the Arcade Fire, I did go in to see them early last decade, and that's up on the blog. And Arcade Fire, one of those bands, I really like them. There's some, especially a few tunes in particular, but the whole veneration of them I never quite got. I always thought I never quite saw what everyone else saw them. I thought they were really good, but I would never list them as one of my favorite bands of that decade. And I saw them again. I kept hearing about how amazing they were live, and we went and we were both sort of like, yeah, it is good, but I guess they just didn't quite do it for me and don't quite do it for me in the way they do for others. I like them and love some of their songs, but they never kind of got to me in the way they did a lot of other people. Okay, on to 14 and Bonnie Raitt and Feist, Ottawa Blues Fest, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Saturday, July 8th, 2006. This was a night of the kind of problems that are good to have in their own way, even if they're frustrating, is on the same night, 3 different acts that we wanted to see were all playing at the same time. Downtown in Ottawa at Blues Fest, Bonnie Raitt, who they finally got to the festival, was headlining the main stage, and I had wanted to see her for years and years, and also thought she'd be perfect for the festival. On the river stage, I believe it was, Feist, who was then becoming red hot. And she played in the region, but even her club shows, they would sell out in 5 seconds. She was becoming super hot at that point. And we had played Let It Die 5 million times, so we really wanted to see her. However, at the other west end of the city, in that big, ugly shed, Scotiabank Place, I think it's Canadian Tire Center now. Oh God, corporate renaming drives me crazy. Anyway, on that night, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were playing there. And of course, when that was announced, that was that tour they did where they reunited, and Neil did the Living with War album and that sort of thing. And so anyway, immediately, okay, that's the show I want to see. I've never seen them. And then we found out tickets were hundreds of dollars, and it's like, okay, it's Bonnie Raitt, because we knew we could discount Feist simply because we knew we would be seeing her again, and indeed we did a few times in the next few years. We knew she'd be playing regionally, but we thought, like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, what if that never happens again? But the price was too much, so without a question, it was Bonnie Raitt. However, then I had my own little miracle. Somebody I knew through their parents having a box they didn't want to use, we ended up with free box seats for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. So, and that was the right choice, even if the show was actually pretty uneven. The good stuff was great, but there was some dead moments. Regardless, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young are done. I truly believe that is never, ever going to happen again. So it was the right choice. There's still time to see Bonnie, who I'd love to see, but even if the show was uneven, I was so happy to get to see CSNY, and of course, that's off the plate now, so I'm glad that happened. On to number 15, George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars, who I missed not once, but twice. The first time, Ottawa Blues Fest, Tuesday, July 10th, 2007. And the second time is those few years there was that offshoot Blues Fest in the Byward, the free gigs, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Thursday, July 9th, 2009. Now, luckily, I saw George Clinton, one of my all-time heroes, at Lollapalooza in '94, and that's coming up, and was so looking forward to seeing him again. But in 2007, a family event came up that coincided with the night, and we had to cancel. We had to go to this event. It was important that we were there, so I had to miss that. 2 years later, he came back again and played a free gig in the Byward Market. Now, the reason I didn't go is because we had tickets to Blues Fest proper that night, and it was one of these things where I paid for the tickets, and there's somebody I really wanted to see, namely Iron and Wine, which is Sam Beam, the name he performs under. And so I've seen George Clinton. I've never seen Iron and Wine. We went. It was the mistake decision. The set, Sam Beam was great. Actually, the set just was a bit of a disaster, but it had nothing to do with him. The sound was wrong. They had something super loud on the next stage. There was all sorts of problems, but it was not his fault. He did a great job, but it was not an easy gig to enjoy. Meanwhile, again, everyone who went to the Clinton gig said he was amazing. It's like, oh, well, what can you do? Here's hoping I see him. I know he's still out there performing with the P-Funk All-Stars, but I know Bootsy's retired. And anyway, the one time I did see him was incredible. On to show 16 and Broken Social Scene at the Ottawa Folk Festival, Britannia Park, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Friday, August 15th, 2008. And this is another one where the original ticket is on the site because we ended up not going, owing to inclement weather. It's sort of a given that when you live in, say, southwestern Ontario, where we have 4 real seasons, that as you are getting to the end of one season, you are going to have these days here and there that sort of act as a preview of coming attractions. And during the winter months, that's a good thing, because every now and then you might get this day where it just shoots up and it's like beautiful spring or summer. And then the reverse happens as you hit August. Generally, August in southwestern Ontario is stinking hot and muggy and sticky, and you're always going to get one of those nights that will sort of let you know that fall is around the corner and fall is in the air. This night was an extreme. It's almost like we were heading towards winter. The temperature dropped incredibly throughout the course of the day, and by the evening, it was nothing but slate gray skies and pouring rain. So we thought, hey, let's not go sit out in a freezing cold puddle in a field watching Broken Social Scene, who I love, and they are coming up in this series many times. But we knew we would be seeing them again, and indeed I did. And so, but it always sucks when you've bought tickets to something and you can't go because you're rained out. It hasn't happened to me a ton, but you know, it's happened a few times. Luckily, the weather completely cleared up. It went right back to hot, dry, warm, sunny August weather. And the next night the next 1 or 2 nights later, we saw Odetta. I managed to see Odetta before she passed away, and Rufus Wainwright, who I've seen many times, who's always great. So happier news later on in the Folk Festival, not so much earlier on. And unfortunately, that is what ended up burying the original Folk Festival. It had a few of those years where the weather didn't cooperate, but now it's City Folk run by Blues Fest, and it's a big success. Okay, next up, more Canadians with number 17, Leonard Cohen. Southern Hall, the National Arts Centre, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Monday, May 25th, and Tuesday, May 26th, 2009. This is like the Sonic Youth and Red Cross show. This is one that still sticks in my side. I am particularly pissed off by what happened at this gig, and really what happened, this was the beginning of something that was just going to get worse and worse. And this is kind of the time that bots really started coming in more aggressively than they had before and buying up a lot of the best tickets. And then, of course, somebody reselling them online at massively inflated prices. Now, at this point, Cohen was on his comeback trail. He had been declared bankrupt. I went into all of this in episode 6 in the series when I finally did get to see Leonard Cohen in 2012. Now, as I said, he was touring and he'd found huge comeback success, and a whole new generation of people were discovering Leonard Cohen. And he was coming through this part of Canada on this leg of the tour. And most of the places he was playing big sheds, really big auditoriums to large audiences. For whatever reason, on that first way through, obviously it was decided to play 2 nights at the NAC, because a lot, again, where he played later, Scotiabank Place, which is, Canadian Tire Center now or whatever, I think it's 16 to 18,000 capacity when it's full. The NAC is more like about 2,500, 3,000. Now, that was amazing for all the people who were there, and I knew someone who did get to the show. But again, just as with the U2 gig, the ticket demand went way beyond, 5,000 to 6,000 people. And then you have it combined with these super aggressive bots coming in and scooping up all the tickets. So anyway, what happened for this one? I was ready for the tickets to go on sale. There were 2 nights. I had everything set up. I mean, it's a whole process. You go in, you have your account set up, everything is ready, and the tickets go on sale just at the right time. As I mentioned in episode 5, the Bowie episode, when I saw him in 2004, that's the one and only time somebody put the tickets up early. And so, of course, right at the moment, I log in, I hit that I want 2 tickets, something comes up immediately. I get a hit. And I go in, literally, it's seconds into the tickets going on sale. And I go in, and I've got a hit, but there's nowhere in the auditorium where I can get 2 tickets next to each other. And I think I may have been looking at the floor at this point, or what. But it's like, you can't get 2 together, so I immediately scrubbed that. And I went and said 2 anywhere. And so this is now, we're 30 seconds in? They said all tickets are gone. That is insane. Absolutely insane. So anyway, we couldn't get tickets. It was sold out instantly. But again, most of those tickets were scooped up. And just that afternoon, you would go on and see these tickets selling for like 10 times the price or whatever. Anyway, so very, very angry about missing that show. I know someone who did manage to get tickets and said it was one of the best shows he ever saw. And Cohen did come back in 2012, and that was one of the best concerts I ever saw. And that one, I lucked out, and we were like, I think, 13th row or something like that. So we were pretty close. And it was a 3-hour show, and it was quite something, but still. Okay, number 18. Nico Case, Ottawa Blues Fest, LeBreton Flats, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, July 12th, 2009. And as with the CSNY, Bonnie Raitt and Feist evening, there were a few shows, there was a couple of shows in conflict this night. And it was a piss or two, because 2009, that for me was a really poor Blues Fest year. And I had still bought tickets earlier, just figuring that the lineup was going to be good sort of in advance, and then I was really disappointed and ended up buying only certain nights. Or did I buy a pass? Anyway, I bought tickets, and then a few weeks later it was announced that they were also doing this Blues Fest in the Byward, which is the Byward Market in downtown Ottawa. And it was going to be this sort of satellite free festival. And basically most of the free stuff was better than what I was paying for, so it was a real pisser. Now, on this night, Nico Case was headlining, and I had really been wanting to see her, particularly around this time, because she had put out an album, Fox Confessor Brings the Flood, and it's one from that period, sort of mid-late 2000s, that I just played, and I had wanted to see her. However, that was the ticketed gig. That's it. I must have had a festival pass, and or were there tickets? Anyway, I had a ticket for the evening, but my nephew was up, and down on the market was Broken Social Scene, who we were talking about earlier. And it was the clear choice between the two of us, especially since, and this is something I didn't realize at the beginning, but later on, is I started seeing Broken Social Scene in 2002, 2003, 2003. And they were always one of my favorite live bands, but because I was seeing them in Ottawa, almost every time I saw them, they were this huge unit, because all of their sort of satellite members, like, for instance, the brass section, most of the time I saw them, they had that whole brass section with them. I didn't find out till later that that's rare. They really don't play a lot of gigs with them. It's just proximity. Because Toronto isn't that far away and Montreal is really close, pretty much all of their satellite members would come to Ottawa to play the shows. So in terms of, since Broken Social Scene had this shifting group of members, there's about 6 or 7 core, but pretty much almost every time I saw them, it was more like 10, 11, 12 people on the stage. And I particularly remember this gig, which of course I will be talking about down the line, being particularly good. So anyway, I did get to see Nico Case a couple of years later. She was pretty drunk, headlining Blues Fest again, so it all worked out. I just wish I hadn't spent money on tickets when I was going to see a free gig. But anyway, okay. And now 19. Simon and Garfunkel, Scotiabank Place, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Friday, May 14th, 2010. I was hoping to hear them sing The Sounds of Silence. Instead, I got The Sound of Silence. Unfortunately, the tour was canceled owing to Art Garfunkel's vocal cord surgery. And, of course, I'd loved Simon and Garfunkel since the 60s. I still love them and play them all the time. Especially Paul Simon in the 70s and the 80s, like as a singer and a songwriter, and on the poppy end of the singer-songwriter sort of oeuvre. But one of my favorite songwriters, and I love their records, and I was really, in particular, looking forward to seeing the two of them together. But unfortunately, what can you do? It happened. Art Garfunkel needed the surgery. It was canceled. And, of course, there's been a falling out. They're getting older. Paul Simon's retiring. So that was it, my one and only slot. And we were looking forward to it. But that's the way the ball bounces. And I have my ticket for the show that we never attended, up on the blog at mylifeinconcert.com. Okay, and the last of the original list of 20, the Black Keys and Wanda Jackson, Ottawa Blues Fest, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Friday, July 8th, 2011. Now, I've written about this night on the blog. It's there's 178b, Enjoy Yourself, where I go into the sets by the Specials, the Waterboys, Animal Collective, and Solange between the 8th and the 12th. But on the night of Friday, July 8th, we were due to go down to see Wanda Jackson, rockabilly legend from the 50s, who was on the comeback trail with her Jack White-produced album, and then the Black Keys afterwards on the main stage. And it was a beautiful day, beautiful evening. We got to, Wanda was on headlining the second stage, so that she was on at 8 in the evening. And we got there a bit early, and we were really up close. And for about a half an hour, we were standing there, and it was just the most perfect summer evening. And it was like a flick was switched. All of a sudden, the winds came up, the skies went dark, and it was not good. And she came out, and Wanda Jackson did come out on the stage. I got to see her do at least one number. And then the rain came down, and finally she was like, sorry, we got to end this. I'm going to be electrocuted. And off the stage she went. There's actually some pictures I have up on the blog for this entry of her on stage before she had to vacate early. And it was one of these things where it went from just, beautiful summer evening to typhoon, like absolute torrential downpour. And because we were right at the front of the stage, of course, we were the last to be able to get away from that. And by the time we did, there was simply no cover and the storm wasn't letting up. And it was weird because as the storm was hitting, I could see the stage kind of swaying a little bit. This was the second stage. And I was thinking like, wow, what if this came crashing down? That would be really bad. And so anyway, it poured for about 10 minutes and we were like, we're going home. We were soaked through the skin. I wasn't going to spend the rest of the night like that. Not to mention, too, it had rained so heavily, everything was flooded. I wasn't really sure they were going to be able to restart the festival because I didn't think it would be safe. I didn't know. We left. As it turned out, they did start everything later, and they kind of just went past curfew the one night, and the sets were abbreviated, but I don't care. I felt like a water rat. We were really uncomfortable, and so we just went home. And I did get to see the Black Keys later on, the next year, 1 or 2 years later, and I've written about that. The weird thing was that thing with the stage, and the next night or the next week, I saw Jane's Addiction headlining on the main stage, and we were really up close. And I was with a friend of mine at the time who'll be coming up, and we were very close. I remember, again, because of what had happened, looking at the even bigger stage, and this stuff never usually crossed my mind. I was going, wow, if anything happened. And it was the next night that the stage collapsed just before Cheap Trick came on. Now, I wasn't there that night. I didn't go the last night, thankfully. But wow, really, really weird that those things happen, almost premonitions of what was to come. Now, that concludes the original 20 gigs that I mentioned in the blog entry that I put up in 2012. However, here we are in 2020, the summer of 2020, and this is the summer of all canceled gigs as the world grapples with the COVID pandemic and tragedy. So that's why I thought it's the perfect summer to do podcasts based on these entries, because that's what's happening now. And because of COVID, I missed what would have been my first 2 shows of this new decade, which were to have taken place here in London, Ontario this past April. So I've updated the blog entry. It's now 22 entries. And what I was initially thinking, I started this podcast series back in February, just about a month or so before all the COVID stuff hit. And the first series of episodes I did was, for those of you who maybe are just finding the podcast, is I looked at one gig from each decade I've been a concert goer, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 90s, and 2010s. And since I didn't know how much there might be to say about these gigs, I just wasn't sure. I thought I'm going to wait till I get to the gigs, and if they go well, I do another sort of additional one of these 2, sort of to start the new decade. But of course, unfortunately, the 2 concerts never happened. So in addition, we'll now go to 21, Damo Suzuki at Call the Office here in London, Ontario. It was meant to happen April 8th, 2020, and of course, the tour and the gig got canceled because of COVID. Right about the time everything was shutting down, I remember literally that when I realized everything was shutting down, I was in the process of ordering the ticket. Like, that was on my to-do list for the day for this and the next show. And then I just thought, well, wait a minute. This may go more than a few weeks. Maybe I shouldn't order the ticket. So I held off doing so. And of course, it's most unfortunately gone on for more than 2 weeks. But anyway, Damo Suzuki. Of course, he was the lead singer of Can, the famous avant-garde German band, part of the quote-unquote krautrock scene, krautrock music. That also has Neu, and of course, sort of Kraftwerk were an electronic offshoot of all that. And I really don't know much about his solo stuff. I really just know the Can tracks from the early 70s. And I do know he performs. He was here a few years ago And I believe he was kind of almost like a private party he performed at. And I know someone who was there and said it was really something. He's a very spontaneous performer. So it was cool that he was coming to Call the Office. It would have been the first ticketed show I had seen at Call the Office since my return. Since when this series gets into the 80s, there's a lot of shows that happen there that I'll be talking about. But unfortunately, there you go. It did not happen. And less than 2 weeks after that, show number 22, on Friday, April 17th, I was slated to see Sloan on their Navy Blues tour at the London Music Hall here in London, Ontario. They were touring that album that they put out in 1998. And One Chord to Another is my favorite Sloan album, one of my favorite albums of the 90s. But Navy Blues is one I love as well. And I was really looking forward to seeing them play the whole album, but of course that also got canceled. Now I noticed that it's been reposted that apparently they're supposed to be performing on October 18th, 2020, but I don't know, guys. I think that's pretty damn optimistic. I know I surely will not be there. Just think I don't think things are going to be returning as soon as we would like. But anyway, there you have it. This is my ode to these and other shows that I have missed. Those of you out there, you have your own stories. Go to the blog, go to the Facebook page, share with us the shows you missed and why. Tell your stories, and hopefully some of these stories I had are things that are familiar with you that you can relate to through the years. So in episode 10, I'm going to do what was initially the first part of this when I put it on the blog, and this is going to be 20 acts I wish I'd seen, with the notion is I will never see them. Like, for instance, I still haven't seen Bonnie Raitt, but all things being good, in a few years we'll all be out there and Bonnie will be back out there on the road, and hopefully I will get to see her. These are acts where most of the people are dead, or key members are, or there's no talking between them. It's just simply not going to happen. So these are the 20 shows, starting with artists in the 20s, going right up until 1980. And pretty much since then, I've seen most of the acts I've wanted to see. So anyway, that's next time. I'll be going through the 20 acts I wish I could see. I'm going to be getting in my time machine and going through a whole series of genres and time frames and decades. So join me on that journey. Once again, this is Various Artists, mylifeinconcert.com. Remember to check out our blog where I post the podcasts as well. You can hear the podcasts on our Buzzsprout site. Also, we have our YouTube channel, youtube.com/mylifeinconcert. We have the Facebook page, Instagram, which we're still kind of building up. We're getting there. And remember to like, follow, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. So this is Various Artists saying bye for now. Remember, I'm now on Spotify as Various Artists. I have MLIC playlists, and there's one that's going to be up for this episode, a complimentary playlist of all the artists I've been talking about and songs that are fitting for me not being able to see them. Anyway, until next time, we'll meet up at the next show. This is Various Artists. Take care.